Welcome back, everyone. I'm with Patrick Chiles again. Today we're going to talk about my perennial favorite, the Russian-Ukraine war. And this one's going to be actually a quick hit episode because we don't have a lot of time to get into all the details. But Patrick, what's your assessment on? And by the way, it is April 23rd, so I made a number of predictions in an episode that was recorded on April 19th or April 20th, and it still hasn't aired yet. But what I predicted came true, which was basically what the Russian strategy was in the southern front, which was to just seize all of the south all the way to Odessa. The Russian military source that leaked or admitted to the Russian strategy was basically all of southern Ukraine stretching to Transnistria in Moldova, which is effectively the same thing. But just so the audience knows, I predicted it. We'll see it after the news came out. Where are we? So given that it's April 23rd, Patrick, what's, in your view, what's your assessment of how the Russians have done so far? And just so the audience knows, you have a background in aviation operations from the Marine Corps. So, what's your assessment of the Russian tactical performance thus far, and do you think they're going to learn? And what things do they need to do to salvage their already kind of admittedly abysmal operational performance? It's a very loaded question, I guess, but
well, there is a lot to unpack there. In my military experience is a couple of decades removed now. I mean, it's something you never get out of your system, and so I'm always following it. The thing that has really surprised me about this is that they couldn't establish air superiority right away, and it looks to me like they still haven't. Seeing the drone footage of Ukrainian javelin teams, taking on armored formations, videos of the helicopters getting shot down. I mean, I get it. It is, you mentioned earlier, it's kind of a one-sided propaganda war. We're seeing a lot of stuff that makes it look like the Ukrainians are just owning them, and in some cases they are. Hell, on the social media side, they're absolutely owning them. That's opened up a whole new front of information warfare. I don't know that anybody really anticipated. But yeah, for me, the surprise has been that they haven't been able to establish air superiority, and so everything they have is vulnerable because of that. And it looks like now the Ukrainians may be operating inside Russia.
Yeah, actually, I haven't heard a lot about it, but there's the chemical plant explosion. There's another building. There were like two buildings yesterday that were. I don't want to use the word sabotage because I don't know. Because I've heard an alternative theory too, that when they're producing a certain type of propellant in the chemical plant, if you kind of haven't invested in upgrading it and you've jury-rigged a bunch of the processes and taken out all the safety controls and things like that, and then suddenly you're running low on ammunition and you need to ramp up activities, you might just have a fire that breaks out naturally. Static
discharge can light off a freaking hell of an explosion.
So with that, I mean, now that you mentioned, I haven't said anything about this stuff. What do you think's going on there? Do you think it's sabotage, or do you think it's the just run-of-the-mill Russian corruption and incompetence?
There's been quite a few. It's just been in the last couple of days. I think militarily important factories and depots that have gone up in flames. And of course they've shown that they can reach Russian operating bases on the other side of the border and disrupt some of that. But what's that line from? Is it the line? It's from Goldfinger. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, three times is enemy action. They're up to at least number 3 and maybe counting. So,
Maybe like the helicopter thing, the helicopter raid. Yes,
mm,
that's definitely Ukraine. The sinking of the Moskva, definitely Neptune missiles from Ukraine.
oh yeah,
Um, but there's like two more, and it's hard to because they're much deeper. They're much deeper into Russian territory.
yeah, and there's again back to the information warfare side of it. Um, as you mentioned, there's a lot of information that we're not getting, and it's really easy to get excited for the Ukrainians. I mean, because everybody with a conscience ought to be on their side. Set aside how historically, corrupt they've been, and with their own political families, no names mentioned, having ties, lucrative ties to them. You know, Russia can't just go around invading countries because they feel like it.
Right.
You know, you know,
And
you,
taking territory,
yeah,
right? Like
exactly. This is a
like they
purely
admitted
democratic.
yesterday that like southern at least you know what though, good on them for at least admitting what we already knew, right?
Mhm.
Which is like, look, we're just going to take this territory, so we control the Black Sea coast.
Yeah,
Oh,
and so at least they're honest about it. I mean, it would be really cheap, and I'm sure people make the comparison. Well, look what we did in Iraq. Well, we can have a whole separate argument about the wisdom or lack of wisdom of that, however you want to look at it. We weren't just going there to claim territory, obviously, nor Afghanistan.
and plus, we subdued their conventional military in 6 weeks.
Yes, so there's that. um, but yeah, back to what the Russians done. It really has been surprising that it, their tactics don't seem to have evolved very much. The thing that we heard all the time back during the Cold War is their organization wasn't like we did in the West, especially in the United States, where it's not so top down. It's more distributed, and you rely an awful lot on your career NCOs and enlisteds to know their jobs and understand the mission. The whole commander's intent.
Yeah,
Um,
mission oriented tactics.
they were way more top down. That their NCOs and enlisted only did exactly what they were told, and they weren't really able to think for themselves. And that was going to be the difference on the battlefield. And boy, we're seeing it in practice. It doesn't look like that has changed in 30 years. Um, you know,
Here's an interesting thought, actually. Um, so the Chinese have had officers that have observed battles at the National Training Center, with um, American permission. I wonder those officers who visited and saw that. I wonder, saw us fight, like me as Op 4 fighting as Russians. They saw that. I wonder what they're like if they've seen that and they're watching what the Russians are doing now, what their takeaway is. I'd be very curious about that.
they've got to be watching this and taking a lot of notes. And my first thought was when a month and a half ago was, oh boy, they're watching this and they're going to see what kind of success the Russians have and how we probably won't react to it, and Taiwan is toast. Um, you know, I, I initially thought China would take up take
I
this
think
up.
they're smarter than that. I think they're smarter than that.
Well, yeah, they are. They really do think long term, and I figured out I was wrong pretty quickly. But I really thought that I could foresee them moving on Taiwan, taking advantage of all that chaos. But
They know that
yeah,
if they did that, um, their infrastructure in the South China Sea would be gone in an afternoon. Um, and I know that because I've had a prior guest who's spoken to admirals who say that they could take it out in an afternoon because they know where everything is, and everything's kind of targeted, ready to go. Um, the second thing that would immediately happen is the Strait of Malacca would be shut down. and within a month or so, 90% of their oil and natural gas is gone, and the Chinese would not only be caught with their pants down trying to invade Taiwan, which we would aggressively, um, uh, oppose and like very likely send troops because the 80 or 90% of all advanced semiconductor foundries are located on Taiwan.
Yeah,
Right? We let that go, like we're done. So that's an existential threat to our economy, to the EU's economy. But within a month, they would not only have get a massive bloody nose in Taiwan, they would have to deal with massive internal dislocation and disposition when as their economy slows down because they have no fuel. Now that 80 to 90% has been mitigated a little bit with all the pipelines that they've kind of the wheel and spoke, whatever it's called, that they've set up. The reason that they had to set up all that stuff was to come up with a way to mitigate that potential threat. But I don't think it's they're really ready for that yet. But we would shut them down, and they'd have to deal with internal disruption and civil war and things like that when their population starts to starve. So they know, we know, and I think they still have some more time. They're just going to wait it out.
Well, the thing that I've wondered is that them looking at how things went in Russia. I'm sure they're comparing that to their own tactics. I wasn't aware that they had been observing our training at NTC.
Yeah, we had officers that they were invited to watch. Now they wanted to send soldiers to be on each individual tank crew to observe, and we obviously said no. Absolutely, they have their own training center now that's north of Beijing, where instead of the like we call our op, we have our op 4 and then the blue 4. They have their op 4 and then they have the red force.
They're their own red team. Yeah.
Well, no, they're the good. The red force obviously is the good guys.
The good guys, right?
Red 4, red force, whatever. But they have a training facility north of Beijing that is modeled off of the National Training Center.
I got to think that they're looking at that and they're reevaluating their own tactics. And you also have to think if they've been observing what we do at places like NTC, that they were already reevaluating their own tactics. And that's something I don't know enough about is what kind of doctrine they have for ground forces. Did they follow the old Soviet model that Russia never seemed to break out of, or were they more forward thinking? And
I mean, the last thing I've read, but this is 20 years ago. There's a book called Unrestricted Warfare, and it was written by some PLA colonels, and it was in response to the first Gulf War. And their thesis was that America has its golden bombs and this and that. So the way to oppose the American military is with low tech, high payoff, technologies or tactics. And they're right to some extent, but this conflict that you're seeing right now invalidates a big part of that premise, right? Because what we're doing is we're seeding, the technology is expensive, but it's not, it's expensive. Yeah. But it's not that expensive on a relative basis because, we can seed these weapons to the Ukrainians and they can destroy much more expensive Russian equipment, right? Which the Russians can't really afford to replace at a rate commensurate with the rate that we can afford to produce more Javelin missiles. So they're going to have to definitely look at their doctrine and tactics and adjust certain things because, is the tank dead? No. Like you'll see in the Donbass region where the terrain dictates that javelins aren't going to be as effective because there's nowhere to hide, right? But drones, you're going to have to adjust your doctrine and tactics to deal with drones. But tanks still will have a place because you can't advance across wide open spaces without them, right? Otherwise, you're going to get slaughtered. So, there's going to be, even us, our military, we're going to have to be furiously taking notes and adjusting our doctrine and tactics to deal with, drones and other advanced weaponry in the future. So we'll see. But anyway, your assessment about what do the Russians need to do going forward to kind of turn this thing around?
What I worry that they'll do is just, if they realize that they can't win conventionally, again, the targeted strikes never happened. There wasn't a decapitation strike. They weren't able to take down their communications or intelligence. Command. Was it C4SI now is the acronym. They haven't been able to squelch the opposition to them, so they're just going to keep amping up and taking more and more drastic measures. We're starting to see some of the fruits of that. There was talk a week or so ago that they were using chemical weapons. I think that ended up being discounted as not being true. I certainly hope it wasn't.
No, did it? It just went dark as far as I know.
Yeah, I had seen some talk that it came from whatever is it the actual neo-Nazi unit they have within the Ukrainian army.
The Sabotage, and by the way, they're not neo-Nazi.
Okay.
Like this is just there are elements within it that have neo-Nazi sympathies, but they are a legitimate part of the Ukrainian military. Their flag looks kind of Nazi-like, but I mean, there is about as many neo-Nazis in the U.S. military as there are in the Ukrainian military as there are in the Russian military. So it's which is actually frightening, right? Because the same thing's going on in our country. It's like, what? It's wrong to assault somebody, but punch a Nazi, right? What's a Nazi? Well, anybody who's to the right of the JFK.
Yeah, anybody
right?
you disagree with now is a Nazi.
But the point is, like, what the left should learn from this conflict is how easy it is to rile up, people to kill another people based on a completely absurd claim of the need for denazification and things like that. Like the Russians are just taking what's worked very well in the West to demonize and to justify violence against a particular part of the population. And they're just applying it to Ukraine. And the fact that nobody's commented on this in the media establishment just goes to show that the media establishment is, 90% swayed one way. But it should be a lesson that makes people a little bit more thoughtful about what they say. Because, once you say, this particular group, it's okay to just exterminate them. That's what's happening. And we're showing it in the West too. It's the same here. So, and by the way, it's not an exclusive, it's not exclusively something that's on the side of the left, right? We also see it on the right. I can't think of any immediate examples, but that's also because I'm just not thinking of any immediate examples. But it's something that's built into the psychology of every single human being on the planet. And the fact that we're not being more reflective and looking at this particular example that, in Ukraine, about how it was easy to just, because I think despite what the media is saying, if I had to just guesstimate, I'd say maybe 15 to as much, to 35% of the Russian population is against this war. Mm-hmm. I think most of them are for it, is it 83% or whatever 82%, whatever the last poll was in Russia? Probably not, but it's still pretty high. And it's only going to increase as the sanctions bite the population. So,
yeah, and again, that's the point that I worry about, is that Putin gets painted into a corner, that it gets to a point where he can't win in Ukraine without doing something really, really drastic that makes the rest of us just reel back in shock and decide, okay, we can't let this go on anymore, and now it's time for us to get involved. And I worry about it spinning out of control and becoming for him a personal war of survival. Because let's face it, dictators don't leave power gracefully. There's not a transition of power like we have in our country. Where he can just go off into retirement. He either stays in power or he dies, and it's either natural causes or other. And if he feels his power being sufficiently challenged, I do worry that he's going to do something really drastic.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, making comments about regime change are not helpful. Like I understand what Biden meant to say, because when he said it, I'm like, I know exactly where you're going with this, but it can easily be misconstrued. And to be 100% clear, what the message that Putin may have heard would be that the U.S. might fund an assassination campaign against him, right? And that's not at all, or regime change, right? Like actually send in troops like we did in Iraq, which I doubt he would ever think that we would be stupid enough to do that, right? He's a smart man, but funding an assassination campaign, absolutely, he can totally, his conspiratorial mind can definitely go there. What Biden meant to say is that oligarchs, if Putin were to mysteriously swallow a poison pill and somebody new came up, we'd be willing to deal. And he was just the way that he
have experience with that, doesn't he? He doesn't, applying that method to other people.
Say more. I'm not familiar with that.
The polonium in the tea, that kind of thing.
Oh, you're talking about Putin. I thought you were talking about Biden. I'm like,
no, God, no.
Yeah. Polonium, dioxin, Novichok.
There may be, I have my opinions that I'm generally too new at this game to voice. I mean, nobody cares what I think anyway, but I may have my disagreements with the current administration, but I wouldn't suggest that.
Yeah.
But
and frankly, I also wouldn't suggest that somebody goes in and tries to kill Putin, because the long tail of that is who would be his successor, right? There's not a lot of great candidates, and B, you have the loose nukes issue, right? If there's not a clear successor, you're taking a lot of risk of instability in the world's largest nuclear power.
Yeah, and back to what you said about the regime change comment. Obviously you got to be really careful at that level, but there's just a difference in interpretation of languages. The way we say something may make perfect sense to us, and we know what we're talking, what we're trying to get across, but the person who's translating it into their own language, your language kind of determines how you think in a lot of ways. And and not just the mechanics of this word means that word, and in a different language, they may hear something completely different, and as you said, something that suggests a lot, something that suggests something a lot darker than what he intended. You're right. Putin and his inner circle may hear that as a hit order, right?
All right, my friend. I'm long past my hard stop. So Appreciate you having you on. People should definitely check out Frontier, which comes out in the mass market paperback, as well as in June, as well as Frozen Orbit and your earlier books as well. So appreciate talking to you, and I hope the audience enjoyed the episode.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you again.
Really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.